Anytime you're ready, you have your 5 minutes.
All right, thank you. Chairwoman Stavisky, Chairwoman Kruger, Chairwoman Glick, members of the legislature, thank you for this opportunity to present this testimony on behalf of the Association of Proprietary Colleges. My name is Donna Gurnett, and I'm the president of the association. And I'm joined here today by Christopher Barrow, who is the Vice President of Government Affairs for LIM College. I would start my testimony today by asking you to turn to the last page of my testimony, to the APC Fast Facts that we've put together for you. I've had the opportunity to participate in this hearing for several years now, and so I know that you've heard me talk in the past about who our members are, who our students are, where they come from, the demographic, and most importantly, the strong student outcomes that they have. It's important to keep these facts in mind today, as I would like to talk to you today about the governor's proposed For-Profit College Accountability Act. In many ways, the goals of APC align with the governor's goals of expanding access to higher education and combating student debt. However, we believe that the governor's proposal, which was conceived due to reports touting inaccurate and misleading data, are flawed, not only because it targets just the proprietary sector, but because it also ignores the strong, long history of strong student outcomes and success demonstrated by this sector. To be clear, if this act goes into play as it currently stands, it will decimate the entire proprietary sector, both the non-degree schools and degree-granting colleges entirely. This is not a proposal that measures accountability as suggested, but a proposal that will eliminate the entire sector of higher education in New York, a sector that educates thousands of students with strong graduation and job placement rates and provides a direct pipeline to employers across the state in critical industries. Now, the governor's proposal has 5 components to it, but Christopher and I are going to limit our remarks tonight due to time to just 2. And the first is I'd like to talk about the 80-20 rule. This requires that for-profit colleges demonstrate that they are not receiving more than 80% of their tuition revenue from public sources, including Pell, TAP, ETA, and federally backed student loans. At the federal level, there is a similar regulation called the 90-10 rule that states that for-profit colleges cannot receive more than 90% of their tuition revenues from federal sources. All APC member colleges meet the federal metric with no issue. The governor's 80-20 proposal, however, would not only increase the amount of revenue that must come from private sources, it also significantly expands the definition of public funding. Because proprietary colleges receive no direct state or federal aid, this tuition revenue accounts for over 90% of our overall revenue. Therefore, any institution that serves a high number of low-income students, minority or first-generation students that are eligible for these financial aid programs will have difficulty meeting this metric. This metric amounts to little more than a reflection of the demographic of the students that these institutions serve. The second metric is the requirement that for-profit colleges spend at least 50% of their expenses on student instruction, and I'm going to turn it over to Christopher to address that.
Thank you, Donna. Again, I represent LIM College, which will be celebrating our 80th anniversary and is an institution with a rich and unique history focused on educating students in the business of fashion, located in Midtown Manhattan, one of the global homes of the fashion industry. This proposal would have a direct impact on our institution, imposing an unreasonable requirement that we and other proprietary colleges must spend at least 50% of our expenditures on student instruction, which in the governor's budget is defined primarily as faculty salary and benefits. This completely disregards the substantial investment we have made in student academic support programs and personnel with comprehensive math and writing centers, other wraparound services such as advising, career management, counseling and accessibility services, student affairs, co-curricular programming, student financial services counseling, all of those without the benefit of any direct public dollars, and other capital investments and improvements made to ensure that our students successfully graduate on time and find jobs in their fields of study. We've looked at the data. It's publicly available on the Department of Education's IPEDS website. In fact, even with a broad definition of what constitutes institutional instructional expenditures, over 65% of all four-year colleges regardless of sector of higher ed in New York, would not meet this measure. That includes institutions such as NYU, Cornell, Juilliard, and many other prestigious institutions in the state. In fact, a very narrow definition of just salary and wages, as is implied in the governor's budget, when you take that look, you'll find that less than 10 colleges in the state actually meet that metric.
So what happens when, can we just finish just one more?
No.
Nope, okay.
Sorry.
That's okay, that's all right. I know it's been a long day, so,
We're into questions now.
okay.
If this is too narrow a definition on the revenue side of the expenses that you attribute, the 50%, what other, perhaps you could give to us at some other time, what other markers and what percent they would, so that we sort of look at a different definition. Right now you're saying the definition's too narrow. Come back and tell us what would be a more appropriate definition and what that looks like.
We can share that the average percent of instructional expenses for faculty salary and wages in the state across all sectors is about 22.4%. That's average, public, private, nonprofit, for-profit. And that's publicly available information.
What other categories would you include in making what you believe the definition would be more reflective of what is appropriate?
If I could just answer that. I think what we need to do is kind of get to the heart of what it is that the regulation is trying to do. And I guess, you know, the whole deal was that they didn't want us spending too much money on advertising, which is fine. I completely get that. But I do think that you need to take a look at what it is that the regulation is trying to get at the heart at. And, you know, we know that these colleges are spending a significant amount of money on student support services, wraparound services, and capital investments. So we can certainly take a look at that and get back to you about that. But I can assure you that we're actually spending a very small amount on advertising and recruiting and that kind of thing, which I believe is what they were really concerned about.
You have another minute, do you want it? Senate? Oh, Toby Stavisky.
How many of your member institutions are in compliance today?
Well,
If these regulations were enacted?
Right, so there's the two components. There's the 80-20 rule. I've surveyed our members, and about 50 to 60% of them
Really?
can meet that. Yes, that was very good news to hear. It's really the very narrow definition of the instructional expense. The budget language is clear. It is just salaries and benefits paid to your instructors for classroom time. So that's really our main key, and quite honestly, none of our members would meet that metric.
That's my point. Thank you.
Yes.
Couple of the real quick questions. What is the default rate on student loans for the proprietary colleges?
I could tell you for our sector, and again, you know, I think that we need to kind of make the distinction between the non-degree schools and the degree-granting colleges. We represent the degree-granting colleges, so I'm going to speak from that perspective. And our average for the APC members is about 10.9% at 3 years out. And then including the entire degree-granting proprietary sector, I believe it goes up about another percent, maybe 11%.
And what is the national average?
For the proprietary sector,
Yes.
15.5%.
In other
so we're
words, you're
well below.
well below. Thank you. A couple of other questions. What provision is there in the proposal for cities where expenses are high, such as rent, for example, in New York City? I'm sure your rent is astronomical
Yes.
unless you own the building. What provisions are there for these?
There's no provisions in the governor's proposal, and in our case, you're right, Senator, being in Midtown Manhattan, much of our space, while we do own our historic landmark townhouse, much of the rest of our instructional space is leased space, and it's some of the most expensive real estate, certainly in the country, if not in the world.
And lastly, what will happen if these regulations are enacted?
So what happens is the penalties are very severe. Our colleges would be prohibited from enrolling new students, and our current students could potentially lose access to TAP and ETA. So that's essentially the death knell for our students, or for our students essentially, but also for our institutions. And they would be forced into immediate teach-out situations. And so as devastating as that would be for us, it would truly be devastating to the 26,000 students who attend our institutions and would have to scramble to transfer and finance and complete their degrees. So it would be very disruptive to our students.
Any other assembly?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm a proud former professor at Bryan and Stratton. And if you think being called senator inflates your ego, when you get called professor, that's equally prestigious and awesome responsibility. I love teaching at Bryan and Stratton. In full disclosure, I haven't been there in a bunch of years. I think you're being targeted unfairly. I think it has a lot to do with a certain resident of Washington, D.C. that had his own university that had its issues. I think targeting just because you're making a profit is unreasonable. I don't think I'm going to be able to support this act, but I think what you need to let me know and others is what is it that you're maybe willing to hold yourself accountable for? How can we measure you? How can we keep you accountable? You are receiving federal funds and state funds and responsible for making sure these kids are educated. I will tell you the students that I had at Bryan and Stratton were phenomenal. Some of them to this day still keep in contact with me. So I'm more than willing to help. It is the environment that we're in. We're in a town that has been reeking about being fair and treating people equally, but yet you're seeing disparate treatment and just an education. So anything I can do to help, please let me know. You're more than happy to contact my office with what you think we should be advocating for.
Okay. Can I respond to that?
Please, and you can finish what you were going to say earlier, too.
Right, absolutely. Thank you very much. So our request for today really is to reject the proposal outright. There is no fiscal attached to it, so there's no rush to get this done throughout this budget proposal system and process. What we'd really like to do is have the conversations about where the issues really lie. So, let's talk about strategies and metrics that can be used for on-time graduation. Let's talk about strategies and metrics that can be used to judge student loan debt. Let's talk about cohort default rates. I know we heard earlier one of the senators say something about creating a task force perhaps to take a look at some of those things, and I think that would be a wonderful idea. Right now, APC participates on many state task force, and so we'd love to be a part of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. So your association represents 12 degree granting proprietary colleges.
Correct.
How many non-degree granting proprietary schools do you think there are in New York State?
It's my understanding there's about 350 to 400. That's what the governor said in his proposal.
Right, so the governor is talking about a proposal that would impact everyone, but you are
Correct.
only here making the arguments based on the facts of your institutions. Just to
That is
clarify.
correct.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.